Alright, what is up, you guys? I'm here with the 2013 pay-per-view ranking for WWE. Continuing on this series that I started years ago. And we're finally continuing it. So, 2013 for me, personally, I was watching pretty much the entire year. Like, 2010, 11, and 12, I was kind of off and on. But 2013, I kind of gave it my full attention. Like, I didn't watch Raw or SmackDown or anything, but I did watch the pay-per-views. So, dead last, the worst pay-per-view of 2013. This one's a little obvious, Survivor Series, which is upsetting because Survivor Series is my favorite pay-per-view every year. It's really the only pay-per-view I really look forward to. You know, that and maybe like the Rumble. But yeah, when you have Randy Orton and Big Show as your main event, that's when you're in trouble. It's just, that's not the main event of a Big Four pay-per-view, guys. We also had Del Rio and John Cena. We had a pretty good elimination tag match. That was good. You, of course, had CM Punk and Daniel Bryan versus the Wyatt family. And realistically, this just wasn't a memorable pay-per-view. And a little piece of trivia, this was the last time that both the World Heavyweight and the WWE title were defended on the same pay-per-view. Obviously, at the end of the show, we had the tease that they were getting unified, which we'll talk about that later. But yeah, unfortunately, Survivor Series 2013 was just a dud. You know, I wouldn't say 2013 had any, like, absolute shit pay-per-views. This one was just one of those ones that it's definitely passable. Next up, we have Battlegrounds. First ever Battleground pay-per-view. This had probably one good match, and that was Cody Rhodes and Goldust versus The Shield. That match was great, guys. You know, if you haven't seen that, check it out. It's a great match. Other than that, you know, we had CM Punk versus Ryback. Like, nobody wants to see that. We had Daniel Bryan versus Randy Orton. And, you know, you of course had the famous blackout during the pay-per-view. That's kind of what the pay-per-view is best known for, is the blackout. And that's not a good thing. You know, Big Show getting involved in the main event. Come on. Like, this was just one of those failed experiment pay-per-views, unfortunately. And, you know, CM Punk and Ryback. Put that in perspective for you guys. Next up, we have Hell in a Cell. Another one of those that just couldn't quite deliver. The main event, you know, you of course had Shawn Michaels as your special guest ref with Randy Orton and Daniel Bryan in the Hell in a Cell match, which was okay. You know, looking back in hindsight, the whole Daniel Bryan thing worked in 2013. You know, at the time, though, it was frustrating. You know, he couldn't win that belt. He couldn't be that A-plus player or that top guy. But like I said, in 2013, it was frustrating, but in hindsight, it worked. Which is why I look at 2013 in probably a better light than most people do. But, you know, you of course had CM Punk and freaking Ryback in a Hell in a Cell for the second year in a row. And, you know, overall, the undercard wasn't that great. You did have Cody Rhodes and Goldust versus the Usos, which is a good match. But other than that, it's kind of a forgettable pay-per-view. Next up, we have Night of Champions 2013. CM Punk and Ryback. Or this one had CM Punk and Curtis Axel, actually. But once again, you know, I think Curtis Axel obviously deserved a better spot in the company. And this was his chance at that. And this was kind of his peak of his career, unfortunately. This was more centered around CM Punk and Paul Heyman as opposed to CM Punk and Curtis Axel, which is unfortunate. You know, you had RVD and Del Rio. It's always good to see RVD back in the company, but, you know, he never quite hit that stride that a lot of people wanted him to be in. And this was off of a TNA main event run, you know. So a lot of people expected RVD to, no pun intended, make an impact in the company. But he didn't quite do that. And of course you have Daniel Bryan winning the WWE title, but, you know, for it to only be taken away. But like I said, in hindsight, that works because it's part of that overarching storyline. But overall, the undercard was weak. And realistically, Randy Orton and Daniel Bryan, it was good. But was it really great? Probably not. And then next up, we have WrestleMania 29. I fucking hate this pay-per-view. As you guys know, this is one of my least favorite WrestleManias. I almost went to it, and then last minute we actually didn't end up going. I think the thing that hurts this pay-per-view the most is the undercard and the main event. John Cena and The Rock. It was once in a lifetime. So, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but in 2013, it pissed me off when we saw the rematch. And the second The Rock won at WrestleMania 28, me and a lot of people were like, well, guess we're getting a rematch. Because I always thought John Cena was the right guy to go over at WrestleMania 28. And I was like, well, if he didn't go over, he's probably going to go over in a rematch. So, very predictable main event. Didn't quite end how a lot of people wanted. You know, the pay-per-view ended with basically The Rock putting Cena over, you know, raising his hand at the end of the stage. I like John Cena. Like I said, I think he was the perfect person to go over in this match. But you don't quite want these two crazy rivals to be friends at the end of WrestleMania. It just doesn't work. To me, the only really crazy bright spot of the show is CM Punk and The Undertaker. That match was phenomenal, and to me, that's The Undertaker's last good WrestleMania match. You had Mark Henry versus Ryback. You had, you know, Fandango versus Chris Jericho. It felt like a Payback or a Battleground part of the time you were watching this, and that's the problem. Triple H and Brock Lesnar, I was expecting that match to be great. That was actually the match I was looking forward to the most. And it just ended up being disappointing. You know, the opener, we had The Shield, Randy Orton, and Big Show and Sheamus in a 6-man tag match, and it was a good match. And, you know, after that, it just kind of went downhill. You had Jack Swagger versus Alberto Del Rio in a world title match that really didn't feel like a world title match, even though you have two high-caliber athletes. That's a problem. You know, I like both of them, but it just didn't feel like a world title match at WrestleMania. Next up, Extreme Rules. You, of course, have John Cena and Ryback going through the stage, kind of that cool moment. You have your main event, which was the steel cage match, Triple H versus Brock Lesnar. Extreme Rules, I think, was very up and down in terms of a pay-per-view every year. 2012, that was a phenomenal pay-per-view, and this one, trying to follow it, didn't quite work. You know, you have, you know, just an undercard that was sort of lacking, and, you know, it just kind of felt like that average Extreme Rules pay-per-view. Like, oh, you know, Extreme Rules. It's kind of like 2014, even 2015 a little bit. It's just there. It's a follow-up to WrestleMania. You're going to get a lot of rematches, and you're going to get a lot of advancements to storyline. And I will say this, though. Triple H and Brock Lesnar. That was a 10 times better match than their match at WrestleMania 29. Next up, we have the Royal Rumble 2013. This match to me, or this pay-per-view to me, was very predictable all around. The Rock versus CM Punk. Obviously, The Rock was going over. You know, it was announced, I think in July, that The Rock was going to face whoever was WWE champion. And you, of course, had the CM Punk heel turn on Raw 1000. It was that moment I was like, all right, CM Punk's going to hold the title till the end of January, and The Rock's going to win to go on to face whoever wins the Rumble at WrestleMania. And going into this, it was very obvious that Cena was going to be winning. We had Alberto Del Rio versus Big Show in a last man standing match, which that rivalry was kind of done to death, personally. But decent match. You had Team Hell No versus the Rhodes Scholars. I like the Rhodes Scholars. You know, Cody Rhodes and Sandow, I think they work great together. And Sandow obviously never really hit his stride. And then Cody Rhodes, we all know where he's at right now. In terms of the Royal Rumble, which actually wasn't the main event, first time in, I think, since 2006 that happened. Rumble was, to me, very predictable, especially when you had Ryback and Cena as your final two. It was an average Rumble match. You didn't really have too many surprises, and Cena was obviously the winner going in. And, you know, like I said, I like Cena, but I didn't quite like him in 2013. So, you know, I felt like nobody really wanted to see twice in a lifetime. The whole point of WrestleMania 28, of buying that fucking pay-per-view, was it was a once-in-a-lifetime match. Not twice. It didn't need a rematch. I still stand by that. And the fact that they did two, you know, it angers me, and it angered a lot of people. To this day, it still bothers me. But next up, we have Elimination Chamber. Another match that I didn't feel like needed a rematch was CM Punk and The Rock. It was just very... It was already done. You know, that to me was one of those matches that was... I think it was a pretty important occasion. The Rock and CM Punk. That's a dream match. And I don't think you needed that again to solidify The Rock's title win. So I think The Rock maybe should have just faced somebody else, or just don't even be on the card at that point. You know, just go part-time if that's what you want to do. And this match was nowhere near as good as the Rumble match. We had Del Rio and Big Show again. We had John Cena, Ryback, and Sheamus versus The Shield. Kind of a filler match going into WrestleMania. Obviously, you know, Cena has to look strong. So, one thing I will really give this pay-per-view was the Chamber match. We had Randy Orton, Daniel Bryan, Chris Jericho, Mark Henry, Kane, and Jack Swagger. The Chamber match might not be that eventful, but the winner, I think, was really cool. I really didn't expect Jack Swagger to win. Some people might have, but I didn't. I thought that was really cool. I was a Jack Swagger fan, so I think it's cool to see him actually able to shine there, you know? Next up, we have TLC. This one was, of course, famous for CM Punk versus The Shield in a handicap match, and then Daniel Bryan versus the Wyatt family in a handicap match. I like that dynamic. And then, of course, you had John Cena and Randy Orton for the unified WWE World Heavyweight title. It's a long-ass name for one title. But out of all the TLC pay-per-views we had, like 2011, 2014, even 15, this was one of the stronger TLC pay-per-views. And then next up we have Money in the Bank. This felt special. It really did. For two reasons. You had RVD coming back, which I'm a huge RVD fan. And then we had John Cena versus Mark Henry. Of course, Mark Henry had that fake retirement speech going in, which I thought was great. Great promo. It may have been obvious that Cena was, of course, going to beat Mark Henry, but it was a cool attraction match. You know, Mark Henry really didn't do too much. You know, like I said, WrestleMania, he faced Ryback. Like, come on. But Him and Cena, they put on a decent match there. You had two pretty good, strong Money in the Bank ladder matches. We, of course, had Randy Orton winning, which they did something different. They had, of course, like the All-Star Money in the Bank ladder match, and then kind of your up-and-coming Money in the Bank ladder match, and I thought that was cool. I like that idea. You know, it lets you put over new talent as well as having that kind of nostalgia. So I like that. We had Del Rio and Ziggler. We had Curtis Axel and Miz. You know, it's one of those mid cards that you kind of forget over time. You know, you have, like I said, Dolph Ziggler and Del Rio. They had a million matches. I'll never forget. I went to a house show in 2013, and that was the match. So, you know, it's a lot of filler, but at the same time, you had a great WWE title match with Cena and Mark Henry. More of a great build-up as opposed to a great match, but overall, this was a good pay-per-view. And Money in the Bank, I've always said, is one of the most consistent pay-per-views in history. No matter how bad a pay-per-view year is in WWE, Money in the Bank, usually Survivor Series as well, you're going to get a good pay-per-view out of that. Number 2, we have, surprisingly, Payback. I remember when this was happening, and I was like, man, it's going to be shit. And it ended up being a decent pay-per-view. We had CM Punk versus Chris Jericho. You know, this took place in Chicago. And CM Punk, he was on a brief hiatus after WrestleMania, of course. And, you know, him and CM Punk, as always, put on a good match. And the Chicago crowd's always hot. You had John Cena and Ryback in a 3 Stages of Hell match. And I think that's the last time we got one on the main roster. You know, of course, we had one in NXT. But, you know, you can even see the little ambulance match there. We also had Wade Barrett versus The Miz versus Curtis Axel, a triple threat Intercontinental title match. We had Dean Ambrose versus Kane for the U.S. title. Caitlyn versus AJ Lee. So you had some filler in there, but for the most part, it was consistent. It was a good pay-per-view, hot crowd, and you also have Dolph Ziggler versus Alberto Del Rio again. But this was kind of the big surprise of the year. You know, because, you know, we had a lot of new additions. We had Payback, we had Battleground. I remember, man, they're like, oh, can't wait for Battleground. That'll be a great pay-per-view. But number 1, come on. It's going to be SummerSlam 2013. What else would it be? And I mean, like, this is number 1 by a long shot. This in 2002, dude, they're top 2 for me. I can't think, maybe like 91, but to me this is in at least the top 3 SummerSlams. 2013 was just a kick-ass SummerSlam, guys, and you know, it's so good I got it on Blu-ray. So what we had Christian and Del Rio. I'm a huge Christian fan, as you guys know. And I'm probably more of a Del Rio fan than I should be. But they put on a great world title match. We had CM Punk versus Brock Lesnar. It's one of those matches where you're like, I really hope Brock Lesnar puts in effort. And he did. He delivered. Him and Punk put on a great match. And then, of course, you know, the main event. John Cena and Daniel Bryan in just one of those classics. And, you know, obviously Cena was hurt. You know, he has a little elbow injury. Looked like a baseball at that point. And he put Daniel Bryan over clean. And me being the biggest Daniel Bryan fan right now, that was awesome. And then you had the brilliant ending of Triple H turning heel, kind of starting that authority storyline, having that slow build to WrestleMania. It was genius. You know, having Randy Orton cash in Money in the Bank at the end, it was a genius way to start that storyline. And Really, the only blind spot on this pay-per-view is the opener, which was, Kane and Bray Wyatt in the Ring of Fire match, which was really just a Discount Inferno match. But it's the PG era, so you can't really say it's an Inferno match, but at the same time, it's the same fucking thing. So, yeah. SummerSlam 2013. Check this pay-per-view out. It's not often you have a classic pay-per-view, so please check this one out. But I hope you guys enjoyed this list. Definitely let me know your list down below. For now, this has been the DVD Freak. Peace out.